Algebra 2, target 41. I can graph transformations of basic trig functions. All right, so we've graphed our basic trig functions. A sine wave looks like this, starting at the origin, has a period of 2 pi. Cosine, same shape, just starts at the top of the amplitude and has a period of 2 pi. And your tangent looks like this, has a period of pi. Well, now we're going to talk about translating these graphs. And specifically today, we're going to look at these two right here. So the rules of transformation, if you remember, it's a shift up, right, up, down, left, right. Your up and down components are usually added outside, or are always added outside of the function. In this case, the trig function, you add something outside of it. For your left-right, you're going to add or subtract something inside. So the h will move left-right, the k will move up-down. We have parentheses here because we have a period change that may affect some of these. So that's why there's parentheses and then the b. So kind of the steps to graphing these. First, you want to identify the amplitude. That's a, like always. Your period, 2 pi over b, that's for sine and cosine. Identify your horizontal shift and your vertical shift. Step 2, draw the horizontal line y equals k. So basically, step 2, you're going to apply the vertical shift. This will give you the midline of the graph, or what some people call the equilibrium point, or the equilibrium line. All right, then you're going to find your 5 key points by translating the key points of your basic sine graph with your vertical shift, or adding your h to each of your key points. Then your key points are your start points, your end point, your middle, and then between there. So for sine, it looks like this. These are your key points. And for cosine, these are your key points. And then you'll sketch the graph through those 5 key points. All right, so let's take a look and see what it looks like. All right, graph y equals 2 sine 4x plus 3. First, identify. All right, our amplitude is 2. Our period is 2 pi over 4, which ends up being pi over 2. And then there is no horizontal shift, but there's a vertical shift of 3. Right? So we'll draw the midline, which is 3 up. There is the middle, or the equilibrium. I'm going to go 2 up from there because our amplitude is 2, so we've got to go 2 above and 2 below the midline. And then find our key points. We'll plot them on y equals k. We're going to start, first key point is right here because there is no horizontal shift. Our last key point is 1 full period away. So this key point here is 0. This key point is pi over 2. Halfway between will be one of the key points, so that's pi over 4. Halfway between 0 and pi over 4 will be another one, that's pi over 8. And then halfway between pi over 2 and pi over 4 will be the 5th key point. Basically, each of the key points will be pi over 8 away from each other. So we start at 0, we do pi over 8, we do 2 pi over 8, and we do 3 pi over 8. So those are where the key points are at, and then we just need to trace through and get them in the right spots. So for sine, we start at the equilibrium and we go up. So the first key point from here, from the 0 point, will go up. That's pi over 8, 5. All right, then we'll go to the equilibrium point, and then we'll go down to the next key point. That'll be 3 pi over 8, 1. Then we go back to the equilibrium. There we have 1 full cycle of the sine wave. That's been shifted up 3. All right? Here's kind of what it looked like when I did it on the graphing calculator. Very similar. You can see the equilibrium there. 2 down for the amplitude, 2 up, and shift it over. All right, let's look at the next one, or another example. Y equals 5 cosine 2 times x minus 3 pi. We'll start with the amplitude, which is 5 in this case. The period is 2 pi over 2, which reduces to pi. There is a horizontal shift, left-right this time, of 3 pi, and there is no vertical shift. So we'll ignore that. Now, in this case, we're going to want to shift everything to the right, 3 pi. However, since our period is pi, we're going to shift in a multiple of the period. So everything is going to shift back onto itself anyway. So we're going to actually ignore the horizontal shift as well. All right, we'll draw the midline. There's no vertical shift, so the midline is right on the x-axis. We're going to go 5 above and 5 below. Since it's cosine, we'll start at the amplitude. So that's 0, 5. That is a max. And we want to be pi away for the end of this phase, or end of this period. So that'll be at pi 5. Will be the other max. Now we'll just kind of split it. Right down the middle, that's pi over 2. Split that, we got pi over 4. Halfway between pi over 2 and pi, we got 3 pi over 2, or 3 pi over 4, sorry. So then we'll cycle through, hit the first point, that's your equilibrium. Hit the minimum at pi over 2, negative 5. Cycle up through the equilibrium back to the max. And there we have one cycle of this graph. All right, now sometimes we'll have what's called a reflection. And that's if your amplitude's negative. You're going to have the same amplitude, but if A is negative, we're just going to go upside down. So if A is negative, instead of going up, the sign goes down. If A is negative, instead of the cosine starting at 1, it starts at negative 1. So it's the same thing, we just reflect everything. So nothing else changes. All right, so graph y equals negative 2 sines 2/3 times x minus pi over 2. So same thing, we're going to identify our amplitude. Amplitude is 2, there's a reflection. The period is 2 pi over 2/3. Dividing by a fraction is multiplying by the reciprocal. 2 pi times 3/2, which works out to 3 pi. Horizontal shift of pi over 2. And there is no vertical shift because nothing's added on outside. All right, the midline of the graph is the x-axis. The key points, our first key point, we need to shift everything pi over 2 over. So our first key point will be at pi over 2. And then the end of the graph, the end of the period is 3 pi later. So you take pi over 2 plus 3 pi to find the end. 3 pi plus pi over 2 is the same as 6 pi over 2 plus pi over 2, which gives us 7 pi over 2. Halfway between that will give us our middle point. 7 pi over 2 plus pi over 2 is 8 pi over 2. Divide that by 2, we get 8 pi over 2 is 4. Divided by 2 is 2 pi. All right, we'll go halfway between those 2 points, to pi over 2 and 2 pi. That works out to 5 pi over 4. And halfway between 2 pi and 7 pi over 2, to find halfway, add them up, divide by 2, we get 11 pi over 4. Our amplitude is 2, so we got to go 2 up and 2 below. But since it's negative, instead of going up from here, we'll go down from here. And we'll trace through our points. So our minimum is at 5 pi over 4, negative 2, and our maximum is at 11 pi over 4, 2. Alright, so in a nutshell, you want to plot or identify your information, your amplitude, period, horizontal shift and vertical shift. Draw your midline and find the 5 key points. Base your finding the 5 key points on your period and then breaking your period into pieces.